Walking with Jesus through the Gospels in John chapter 13. And Luke chapter 22. And Matthew chapter 26. And Mark chapter 14. Mark, not so much, because he carbon copies the others. So what Mark deals with, at least one of the others does, most often Matthew. So we won't specifically be looking at Mark, but we bring it to our attention so that we're aware that he's contributing and giving record of what's taking place. So we are presently in what day? So we are on Thursday, all right? And Jesus will be crucified tomorrow. We left off last week that Jesus had sent his disciples to prepare the Passover. So they went and they found a man, just as Jesus had spoken about, who was carrying a pot of water, a jar of water, and that when they see him, they're to follow him and speak to the master of the house, where is the guest room for the master, for the teacher. So, of course, that's what they ended up doing. We'd seen that Jesus is Lord at his death, not just at his birth. So every aspect, every detail is being orchestrated, overseen by God. One of the aspects that we had seen regarding Jesus being Lord at his death was that the Pharisees and the chief priests, the elders of the people, wanted to kill Jesus, but they didn't want to do it during the feast for fear of the people, that they may riot. And so they determined they were going to do it afterwards. But Jesus has something in mind. They wanted to do it in a secret way. If they could do it quietly beforehand, then they would do so. But they didn't know the whereabouts of Jesus necessarily. And it would appear they didn't want to give extra resources to that until all of a sudden Judas shows up and says, I will betray him. So Jesus, he gives the instructions to two of his disciples so that Judas won't know where the Passover meal is going to be eaten together, so that he doesn't have the opportunity to be able to lead the religious leaders to them at that point, because that would have been a quiet time, relatively speaking, for them to be able to arrest him had they wanted to. So let's pick it up in John chapter 13. Jesus has washed his disciples' feet. I said John, but I think what I'd like to do is, we'll come to that after. We'll go to Luke chapter 22. Let's use that as our landing pad. And let's take it from verses 14 to 23. Let's start here tonight.
And when the hour had come, he reclined at table, and the apostles with him. And he said to them, I have earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I tell you, I will not eat it until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God. And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he said, Take this and divide it among yourselves. For I tell you that from now on I will not drink of the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes. And he took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And likewise the cup after they had eaten, saying, This cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood. But behold, the hand of him who betrays me is with me on the table. For the Son of Man goes as it has been determined, but woe to that man by whom he is betrayed. And they began to question one another, which of them it could be who was going to do this.
Jesus is wanting to share this Passover with them. He says, I've eagerly desired to eat it with you. As we look at this, we need to understand the Passover. So let's go to Exodus chapter 12. How many Passovers has Jesus had with his disciples? At least three. So why does he say, I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you? It was his last. And so this was going to be the significant one whereby it would be the fulfillment of the Passover itself. He was going to fulfill its anticipation. So let's pick it up here in Exodus chapter 12. We'll take it from verses 1 to 6 to begin.
And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, This month shall be for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year for you. Tell all the congregation of Israel that on the 10th day of this month every man shall take a lamb according to their father's houses, a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for a lamb, then he and his nearest neighbor shall take according to the number of persons. According to what each can eat, you shall make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male, a year old. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. You shall keep it until the 14th day of this month, when the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill their lambs at twilight.
What are some aspects that we see here already in this passage that Jesus fulfilled at this last Passover? We've looked at part of it in the past, so without blemish. All right, so Jesus is without blemish.
10th day he came into the city to be inspected.
So the lamb was selected on the 10th day of the first month. And Jesus came into the city on the 10th day of the first month. That's when he rode into Jerusalem. Let's continue, taking it from verse 7, and we'll go down to verse 13.
Then they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and tops of the door frames of the houses where they eat the lambs. That same night they are to eat the meat roasted over the fire along with bitter herbs and bread made without yeast. Do not eat the meat raw or cooked in water, but roasted over the fire, head, legs, and inner parts. Do not leave any of it till morning. If some is left till morning, you must burn it. This is how you are to eat it, with your cloak tucked into your belt, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. Eat it in haste, it is the Lord's Passover. On the same night I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn, both men and animals, and I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt.
In like manner, Jesus will fulfill some of these aspects. So he is the unleavened bread. He is the one who his blood is going to be poured out. It's going to be shed. So it's not going to take place during this meal, but this meal is what's going to be instituting or replacing elements of this Passover with the fulfillment or the fullness of what Jesus will accomplish tomorrow at the cross. One other aspect, when he says in verse 13, the blood will be a sign for you. When I see the blood, I'll pass over you. And so the blood, as it's applied to our lives in similar fashion, death does not have any hold on us any longer. He passes over us because we've been redeemed by that blood. Let's go down to verse 46. I will do 45 and 46.
But a temporary resident or hired worker may not eat it. It must be eaten inside the house. Take none of the meat outside the house. Do not break any of the bones. The whole community of Israel must celebrate it.
And what aspect of this was fulfilled by Jesus?
None of his bones were broken.
None of his bones broken. So when he's on the cross, when he has been there for now 6 hours, and the time of the preparation day, the Sabbath is coming close soon, because the new day for Jewish reckoning of time begins when? Evening, sunset. So evening and morning, the first day, as it was in Genesis chapter 1. God created the heavens and the earth, so let there be light. And there was evening and there was morning the first day. Second day, there was evening and there was morning. So the religious leaders didn't want any of them left on the cross. So they asked that their legs would be broken. For what purpose? To die faster. Wouldn't they die fast anyway, since they're crucified? They're on a cross. Not always. Even more than not always. Most often, never did they die quickly. Because crucifixion was designed to be a slow and agonizing death that could go on for days. And they knew that to be the case. So this was not just an execution for the sake of putting somebody to death. This was a method of torturous execution, to make examples of those that Rome said are worthy of death, of capital punishment. And if you're worthy of that, I'm going to make an example of you so that nobody else will want to follow in your steps and find themselves in your place on the cross on which you had previously hung. So they come to break the legs, and they get to both of those on either side of Jesus, and they break their legs. And the purpose of that is so that they cannot support themselves any longer with their legs, because they would have a caving in of the chest cavity. They get weaker and weaker, but then they would heave themselves up in order to open up that cavity in their chest in order to take a breath again, and then they would hump back down again. So that would basically cause them to suffocate. When they came to Jesus, they discovered that he was already dead. So these are all aspects that Jesus fulfills in the Passover itself and in his crucifixion and his death. And it's noteworthy for us to see that these things were accomplished even after Jesus died. So it's not something that he can, if he's just a man, he cannot orchestrate these things. Isn't that right? Once you're dead, you can't make anybody do anything. But God being who he is, him being the orchestrator of every detail, and him knowing the end from the beginning, he's not simply predicting something that will happen. He's giving us information of history before it happens. That's what prophecy is. So it's not a best guess. It's not an estimated guess, but it is recording for us, or telling history before it actually takes place. So that's what this record is all about. And we see that Numbers repeats the same thing about breaking no bones. Same thing with Psalm 34 and verse 20. And then the fulfillment of that is in John chapter 19, when Jesus, of course, is on the cross. And that's what takes place. Let's come back to Luke. There was one other aspect there that we did not look at. What were they to apply the blood with? Do you recall? Hyssop. And how was that fulfilled? The sponge of sour wine. He said, I'm thirsty. And they took and put a sponge on the end of a branch of hyssop. It's important for us to be aware of that, because it's not just they put it on a branch, but we're told exactly what kind of a branch, hyssop. And hyssop is always dealing with a cleansing or a purification by sacrifice or ritual cleansing as a result of the death of a pure animal, spotless animal. So in this very thing, we see the righteousness of God being appeased in a demonstration or a figure as Jesus receives the drink from that sponge on the hyssop branch. So coming back now to Luke chapter 22. In the Passover sequence, there will be more than 1 cup of wine. Have a look when we see in verse 17. So he's told them, I eagerly longed to eat this with you. I've desired with eagerness or zeal to eat this Passover with you. He tells them, I'm not going to eat it until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God. In other words, this is the last time we'll share this meal, until the kingdom of God is established. Then he takes a what? Then he takes a cup. So he takes a cup. When he'd given thanks, he says, take this and divide it among yourselves. Now, we share communion together regularly here. We do so at least once a month. And when we do, we take bread and we take the cup. Is this that cup that Jesus is referring to? The cup that we drink, and we say this represents the cup of the new covenant in his blood, which is shed for us, poured out for us. Is this that cup? Or just pass me one of those cups, please.
No.
Pardon me?
I vote no.
You vote no. All right. Thank you. So we would take one of these cups, and of course these are for convenience sake. I doubt very much that any of you, except with the exception of my wife, would want to drink this after I've drunk from it and then pass it around. Or then that would mean in successive order, the last person would be getting the short end of the stick, if you will. But this is not that cup. This cup that we share is not the one that we see here in verse 17. He took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he said, take this and divide it among yourselves. We're going to see a few verses later. Have a look in verse 20. And likewise the cup after they had eaten. So now he's already given bread, and they've eaten that. He said, this is my body. And then he takes a cup, and he says, after they had eaten, this cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood. So is this the same cup as verse 17? No, it's obvious that it's not, because he's already passed one cup around in verse 17 at the beginning of their time together. And now, after they've shared some time around their meal, and then they have eaten the bread, then he points out yet another cup. This is the cup that is poured out for you. Do this in remembrance of me. So he takes that cup as a representation of what he is about to fulfill for them, specifically that cup. So what is that cup? In order to appreciate what's taking place here, let's go back now. I could have left us, I guess, with a finger in Exodus. So Exodus chapter 6. Pardon me? Exodus chapter 6, and I want to read verses 1 to 7. Can we bring that next slide up, please? And are we at Todd or?
No, we're at Carolyn.
Oh, Carolyn, all right. Oh boy, we've passed through a number. I'm sorry, thank you.
Exodus
6, 1 to 7.
Okay. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of his country." God also said to Moses, "I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty. But by my name, the Lord, I did not make myself known to them. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, where they lived as aliens. Moreover, I have heard the groaning of the Israelites, whom the Egyptians are enslaving, and I have remembered my covenant. Therefore say to the Israelites, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God, who brought you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians."
So particularly in verses 6 and 7, there are I will statements. And with those I will statements, the Israelites had taken that over time then to represent several cups that would be shared during the Passover meal. So I'm going to bring this up for our online audience. So we have 4 cups that are represented here. And the first cup is the cup of blessing. The cup also could be called sanctification. Now, I'm not going to leave that up, so Deb, can you just put that down for a second? Because we'll have our attention on we want to get each of those, all 4 cups together. We're going to take them one at a time, all right? So we're going to take them in succession, just so that our attention isn't drawn to that completely. Pardon me? I'll just go back, yeah, would be fine. So he says, I will bring you out. This is the first cup of the meal. So when Jesus, in Luke 22, during the Passover, he says, he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he said, take this and divide it among yourselves. So they would have each had a cup, and they would have been pouring it into their cups together. So this is a cup that they had celebrated year after year after year. And as Jesus is giving it, he's infusing it with more significance, if you will, where it's a cup of sanctification. He's letting them, through this process, he's letting them know that through him, they're going to be sanctified. What does sanctification mean, or to be sanctified? What does that mean? Set apart. To be set apart. That's what sanctification means. It could mean, another word could be made holy. So holiness is being set apart, different, other than. So the Lord tells Moses that he's going to demonstrate to the people that he is God and that he is going to bring them out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. So I will bring you out. Cup of blessing, because formerly they were not experiencing blessing. The kiddush is the word in Hebrew for blessing. So here they are sharing this cup with a significance greater than what they had experienced up until this point, because it's been a remembrance of deliverance and blessing coming out of Egypt. Now, the blessing and sanctification is going to be theirs complete through what Jesus is going to be accomplishing tomorrow on the cross, which is being represented by this new symbol. So the symbol is still the same. It's still the cup. But now he's pointed it to himself. But this is still not yet the cup that he said, this is the cup of the new covenant, or this is the cup that is poured out for you. Now, at this point in the Passover meal, when we read it in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and if we take the time to read it, how much time is it going to take to read those 4 passages and blend them together? Maybe 10 minutes. Depends on how long we're going to take to read it, but it could probably easily be read in about 10 minutes, which gives us the impression that the amount of time that they spent was a relatively short amount of time during that meal. But they spent the better part of the evening around that meal, and all of these elements that were part of it, in conversation and exhortation. And remember, Jesus was washing their feet in the process of this, which was part of the Passover meal itself. Not the washing of feet, but the washing of hands. So at a certain point in the meal, and Jesus or the host would get up and have a basin to wash or ceremonially wash the hands of each of the participants. But in this case, what does he do? In John 13, he washes their feet. So then he'll take bread. The host, the head of the house, will take bread. And theirs was not square. This is factory-made bread, all right? Passover bread, matzah is what it's called, unleavened bread. And there would be 3 loaves of this at the very least for this purpose, but then there would be other stacks of bread provided for the community eating, all right, for everybody that's gathered around. Interestingly enough, did you notice how the tables are arranged, which there are every time we're together, but how they are arranged tonight? They're arranged in the way that the Passover meal would have been, with a table this way, and this way, a triclinium. And the host would have been seated over on this side in the second place. So, kind of our host tonight, I guess, if that's the case.
Not there.
No, where you're sitting, Brian.
Where you're sitting is the second seat. Well, actually, everybody would be reclining. So there'd be no chairs. The tables would be low, and they would be reclining with propped up on the left arm. They would take 3 of these loaves of bread, and they would place them in a pouch. And there would be separations in the pouch. I don't have one, but there would be one in the first pouch, and then another one in the third pouch. And for the second pouch, the middle pouch, the host would take the bread. You're looking, this was on a hidden treasure. So I want to bring this out so that we can sort of go through the Passover meal, but not all of the elements of the Passover meal, but taking out from that the aspect and the significance, the rich message that is involved in our communion, the Lord's Supper aspect of it. Because we don't observe a Passover Seder, a Passover meal, do we? Has anyone ever observed a Passover Seder? Yeah? No, anybody else? So, for the most part, has anyone ever observed a Passover Seder? Studied a Passover Seder?
I've heard someone talk about
talk about
I
it?
haven't seen a real one.
I've seen some
put it
churches
off, but
demonstrate
they weren't
an aspect
yeah,
of it, but it wasn't an
it
actual,
wasn't an
it wasn't an actual Seder. Okay, so we're not told to remember the Seder, the Passover meal. We're told to remember the Lord's Supper. We're told with these emblems, we are always remembering the Lord's death until he comes. So the host would take the middle piece, what would be the middle piece, and break it in half. And there would be potentially a bigger and a smaller. If it was a relatively even match, then it wouldn't make a difference. If there was a bigger one, it would be kept. The smaller one would be put in the middle pouch. The other half would be taken and wrapped in a linen cloth. And it would be put away until later in the meal. There's significance with the wrapping of this middle piece of matzah, which has been broken. There's different theories as to why there are 3 pieces of matzah, unleavened bread, in that pouch. And we'll take this one because it's from the Messianic Jewish perspective, that these 3 pieces of unleavened bread represent the 3 persons of the Trinity, the Godhead. So the middle one would be God the Son, Jesus, Yeshua HaMashiach, the Messiah. So there's only half in here. So one half is representing his divinity, the other half is representing his humanity. And what was done with that half that represented his humanity? It's wrapped in a linen cloth and it's hidden away. Now here it's out in the open, but it would be put in a place where it would be out of sight, hidden.
Don't they actually hide it so the children can find it?
Yeah, there would be an aspect of today, there would be an actual before the meal or once this is done, then before anything else transpired, everybody stays at the table and the father would get up and hide this piece of bread somewhere in the house. And then at the designated time, the children would be then invited to go and find the hidden matzah, and then whoever found it would get a gift or a prize. So whatever that gift would be designated to be. It's an interesting picture for you and me that when we find Christ, we get the prize. Because when you get Jesus, you get everything, right?
It's just interesting how the Jews do this and not see any significance in it.
They don't-
This
they
is
don't
what they do. They wrap it in the 3 pouches.
Mm-hmm. And you notice the significance of the unleavened bread. What do you see here? Stripes. And then if you're up close enough, you see that there are holes in it, right? So representing the piercings. And then, of course, around the edges, you see that?
Even the dark spots make it look like bruising.
So it looks like bruising, and around the edges, even more so, it's more charred than the rest. And in Deuteronomy chapter 16 and verse 3, this bread, the unleavened bread, is referred to as the bread of affliction. And then Isaiah 53 speaks about the fact that he was afflicted. So he took our affliction for us. So that was Deuteronomy 16:3. I think some people were writing that down in case you were looking for it. And then Isaiah 53, but I don't know the verse number right off for affliction. 7? Is it 5? He was afflicted. The word is actually afflicted. So we want to be looking for that one. 7, yeah, he was oppressed and he was afflicted. So the bread of affliction. So it's set aside for the time being. Well, it would be at this point now that there would be a second cup. So in Exodus chapter 6, then we see, I will rescue you, or I will deliver you from slavery. Pardon me? Did I hear? Is there a question?
It says, I will redeem you with an outstretched arm.
No, that's after that. So
I will deliver you.
So I will bring you out from under the burdens is one. I will deliver you from slavery is two. So I'll deliver you from slavery. This is the cup of deliverance. So we can bring that slide up for our cups once again. All right, so you're going to see judgment there. This is a multiple titled or a multiple named cup. It's the cup of judgment, or the cup of plagues, or the cup of deliverance. Now, for the Jewish people, it's called the cup of deliverance because they were the ones who were delivered. But it's also called the cup of judgment, or the cup of plagues, because that was brought against the Egyptians. So it would be at this point during the meal. Now, Matthew, Mark, and Luke don't tell us, nor does John tell us anything about this cup. Luke is the only one that mentions two cups because it's already assumed that people are familiar or aware of what is transpiring here without giving the details of what's involved with this. Does that make sense? So it would be at this point during the observance of the Passover that with this cup now, there would be a placing of the finger in the cup, and then with each dip, there would be a recitation of each of the plagues, and then they would drink that from their finger, so to speak, and then dip again for each of those 10 plagues, as they celebrated the fact that God delivered them from those judgments and from those plagues. So at this point, now remember, this is a condensed version. This is going on throughout the evening. It's very involved and a lot of stuff taking place. By this point now, they've been eating the Passover meal. They've been eating the lamb that's been roasted, the lamb that had been prepared. Now, there's going to be the taking of the hidden matzah, and this point, then it's going to be revealed, opened. Jesus, or whoever the host happened to be, in this case it's Jesus. So he would take that, and notice, what does he do with that bread? Before he breaks it? Gives thanks. Yeah, so giving thanks, he would be reciting a blessing. So the blessing would be, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz, which means, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. So it's at this point now that he takes this piece of the matzah, and then he will break it. I'm going to break it over one spot so I don't have crumbs over every place that I walk. Incidentally, I did wash my hands just before I came in, and I made sure that the marker was clean before I was using it as well. Pardon me?
Acting as host.
It's now, if you're not comfortable eating it, thinking I have cooties, you are free to abstain.
Yeah.
So at this point, when they get the bread, they would go ahead and eat it.
We still have the communion in our minds.
Yeah, have communion in our mind, said, okay, we got to wait until we're going to eat together, right? Which is a good thing to do in a sense, because we want to make sure that everybody is together on this, and it's a community where we're eating together. But it's a very pensive eating, meaning thoughtful, thought involved. That it's not just, oh, okay, I got a piece of bread. Well, that's pretty good. There's more going on here than that. As this will be the first time they've ever heard this, where Jesus says, excuse me, this will be the first time that they have had anything like this spoken about this bread. Other times it's been broken and given. Now it's broken and Jesus says, this is my body. And they're, what? See, for us it's natural, right? Because we only associate the bread of communion with the body of Christ, because we know the resurrection aspect. They didn't. They didn't understand what's going on yet. So when Jesus is saying, this is my body, up until this point, it's business as usual. It's stuff that they recognize. It's things that, nothing is out of the ordinary until he says, this is my body. And then he gives it. This is my body. This is my body. Can you imagine them trying to process? What does this mean?
Though, like in John 6 talks about being the bread of life. So
Mhm.
would their mind have gone to that?
Possibly to that, but that was a year ago. So it could possibly be that their mind would go to that, because he's already taught that. But we've seen that they're not always the most astute in bringing things to mind at the moment. But it is possible, because the Spirit of God could be working in their hearts to bring that awareness to them. But at the very least, we need to be aware that this is something brand new for their experience, for their ears. This is something never been uttered at any other Passover meal, ever, by anyone. So he says, do this in remembrance of me. This is now what he's done to take this part of the Passover meal, and he's saying, all right, you've eaten this in remembrance of the bread of affliction and the bread of your deliverance in the past. Now you are to eat this in remembrance that I am the fulfillment of this.
Don't we have a modern day tendency to be kind of hard on the disciples in that particular environment, not getting it, as we so clearly get with hindsight, we get to see everything.
I think we're hard on them. If we are hard on them, then we are to our own fault.
Yeah.
As if to say, oh, go ahead, finish your...
But they're living in it, and they haven't, like you say, they haven't seen it play out yet, they don't know what's coming.
Mhm.
And I'm sure they did way better than I would have in the same situation.
Because we put ourselves and say, I wouldn't have done that. I mean, I would have known exactly what was going on. And then we become sort of like Peter, who Jesus said that Satan has desired to sift you like wheat, and you're going to betray me, or you're going to deny me tonight. And he says, no, never. As if to say, I know myself better than you know me. But that wasn't the case. All right, so at this point, we have, again, Exodus chapter 6 as our template. And the last part of verse 6, he says, I will redeem you. And now at this point, he explains how he's going to redeem them with an outstretched arm and with great acts of judgment. What does that sound like to you? Do you recognize this from Sunday? With an outstretched arm. To whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? And that's found in Isaiah 52 and 3. So 52, verse, was that verse 12? And 53, verse 1, I think.
The Lord has laid bare his holy arm.
All right, so is that
Verse
verse
10.
10? All right, so verse 10, he's laid bare his holy arm. And then verse 1 of 53. All right, to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? And so the Lord says to Moses, before any of the plagues are brought upon the people, he says, I will do these things. And this third cup, he says, I will redeem you with an outstretched arm. And with Isaiah 52, verse 10, and Isaiah 53, verse 1, and all that is contained within that prophecy of the Messiah, it's a picture there that the Messiah is going to come, and by his outstretched arm, he's going to redeem his people from sin and death, not just from Egypt. So a greater redemption. So this third cup, we'll bring the slide back up for the benefit of those of you taking notes. I will redeem you. Cup of redemption. So it is now at this point that Jesus, in verse 20, likewise the cup after they had eaten, he had taken it, and said, this cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood. Let's go over to Matthew chapter 26. And let's read 26 to 29.
Matthew 26, 29. While they were eating, Jesus took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and gave it to his disciples, saying, take and eat. This is my body. Then he took the cup, gave thanks, and offered it to them, saying, drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sin. I tell you, I will not drink of this fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it anew with you in my Father's kingdom.
So when Jesus takes the cup, Matthew fills in this detail, that he takes the cup and he gives thanks before partaking of this cup. So in the Hebrew, it would be Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri chag afen, which means blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, creator of the fruit of the vine. And so he says this is the cup of the covenant, or the new covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. So this is the cup of redemption, representing what he's going to carry out tomorrow on the cross. Now, all of these cups are summed up in Jesus, fulfilled by him. But specifically, it's the third cup that he uses to say, this is the cup of the covenant, which is poured out for you. And when he gives it, he says, take and drink all of it. Feel free that when you receive the cup, drink when you get it, or you can wait until whoever is left that hasn't drunk yet, drink together. Your choice. Now remember, for them, they didn't have little cups like this because this was part of their meal. Now they didn't necessarily have a cup like this with a stemmed goblet, but it would have been some kind of a goblet or cup. So this is what...
It wouldn't be like a bowl.
It wouldn't necessarily be a bowl, no. So then they would take the cup and they would drink from it. And I did wash this. If anybody's wondering, it's been sitting up there for a long time and it's been in storage. So I did wash this.
Why not?
It's wood. It's no different than the ones that we had used in Israel. Well, at this point, the meal is essentially over, but there's still some other elements. In John chapter 13, and as we see in the other passages, that he is spoken about. It almost seems misplaced when we read the Lord's Supper and we read about, and the hand of my betrayer is with me at the table, right after speaking about the cup. It's almost like, I don't want to read that because that kind of just takes the attention away from that aspect. Because in Luke 22, this cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood. But behold, the hand of him who betrays me is with me on the table. For the Son of Man goes as it has been determined, but woe to that man by whom he is betrayed.
So it sounds a little bit odd to us in English because it doesn't follow what we expect in statement or sentence structure, because one idea stops abruptly and another one starts right in without any kind of introduction. But I'm guessing the Hebrew or whatever didn't come off that way.
So this would be the Greek, but in that instance, there would be an abrupt information here because they're not expecting anything. Betrayal? Why would anyone betray you? Furthermore, why would anyone around this table betray you? What do you mean? And then we see that each one of them says, is it I? Is it I? Is it I? In John 13, after saying these things in verse 21, Jesus was troubled in his spirit and says, truly I say to you, one of you will betray me. The disciples looked at one another, uncertain of whom he had spoken, and one of his disciples whom Jesus loved was reclining at table at Jesus' side, and that would have been John, and he would have been seated where? Or reclined where? So if this is where Jesus was in the second position, John would have been at the first position. And he would have reclined, leaned back on Jesus so that his head would have fallen squarely in Jesus' chest, so that now he could speak face to face, but as a confidential or quiet interaction. Because Peter, when we see what's going on here, Peter had motioned to him, ask him what's going on. So Peter would have been seated over here. And Peter would have been like, but he asks, and here's what Jesus says, verse 26. It is he to whom I will give this morsel of bread when I have dipped it. So when he had dipped the morsel, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. Now, look at verse 28. Now, no one at the table knew why he said this to him, meaning to Judas, what you are going to do, do it quickly. Now, doesn't it seem obvious that Jesus just pointed out Judas? Because Judas would have been sitting at this position, right beside Jesus. Doesn't it seem obvious that he just pointed his finger at his betrayer? Doesn't it seem very obvious? Like if you were seated at the table and this is what you were reading and this is the knowledge you had, whoever I give the morsel to after I dip, then that is the one who is my betrayer. And then he gave it to Judas.
But if John was talking quietly to Jesus, none of the disciples would have heard him say, "Who is it?" And they wouldn't have necessarily heard Jesus answer.
Mm-hmm. So that is the case with that information. Give me one moment, please. Okay, I was thinking of something else that I wanted to bring out in the midst to try to answer that question, but I wasn't getting it there. So the only one that knows who's gotten that answer is John. But we are told that no one at the table knew, not even John. Verse 29, no one at the table knew why he said this to him. Now, John could be writing this to say, myself included, or he could be saying, I didn't even know why he said this at the time. Now, I know he said to whom he gives the morsel, the bread and dip it, the morsel and dip it into the sop. But when he does this, he gives it to Judas, but he also gives it to everybody else. The first one he gives it to is to Judas. But the dipping in the sop was not an extraordinary thing to be done. This is something that would have been done by everybody during the meal. And at this point in time of the meal, it would have been time for the dipping of the morsel into the sop.
Where does it say sop? And what is sop?
Oh, sorry. So it says dipped it. Excuse me. I'm thinking of, I think it's the New King James says dipped it in the sop. So what is the sop? So dipped it would have been in the dish that they would have had. So whether it was the charoset, which was the sweet fruit and nut mixture, or the marar, which is the bitter herbs, and salty water, which represented their affliction coming and their tears when they were in Egypt. He would have dipped it in one or the other of those and then shared it with the disciples.
So they would have two, or just either or?
There would have been both, but at what point it was either this or that. Some commentators have said it was dipped in both. So it depends on how it was partaken of, because it has taken on different sequences throughout the last 2,000 years.
But some of the stuff that's part of the Seder today
Was not.
biblical. It's just
It has been
tradition.
developed as a part of it.
Yes,
Yeah.
we don't know that Jesus had the haroset or the bitter herbs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's not actually in Scripture. So
Yeah. So whatever would have been part of their meal, that was the charoset, the marar, or whatever it was they were dipping their bread in, that was part of their meal at that point. So to give it to Judas wasn't as big of a big neon sign flashing on and off, here it is, as we might say. I mean, look how plain this is. And then Jesus makes the declaration in verse 27. What you're going to do it quickly. Now, nobody around the table understood what he was saying. But notice that Jesus is basically saying, I am in charge here. So I'm now forcing your hand. He's calling, well, he's not calling this bluff because he can't bluff it. He's calling him out. He's telling him, I know what you have agreed to do. Now, go and do it. So he can't say about the way, he just gets up and he goes. And everybody else thought that he was doing something dealing with provision regarding the feast. So the feast would be in reference, not what they're eating now, but what they will eat tomorrow. Because he was the one that was the treasurer. He held the money bag. So he gets up and he leaves, and nobody is the wiser for why he's gone, except to assume that that is the reason that he is left. So as soon as he receives the morsel, immediately he went out, and it was night. Yes?
So he has planned this in advance with the high priest.
Judas?
Yeah.
Yep.
And then he comes to the meal with the rest of the guys. And when Jesus announces that somebody's going to betray him, they don't know who it is.
Right.
And in my mind, that they includes him. Is there any way, and I'm just wondering this out loud, that he doesn't even know what he's going to do at that point, even though he's already arranged to do it?
He doesn't know how or when he's going to do it.
Does he have a different understanding of what he agreed to do? Does he think he's agreed to do something of a lower level? Turn him in to get a reward or whatever, and not realizing the implications of what that's going to mean and happen. And then when Jesus announces that one of them is going to betray him, is there any chance that he doesn't make the connection between what Jesus has just pointed out and what he's already agreed to do to be a part of that? Is there a chance that he doesn't know what he's done?
There's two things going on here. He's opened him up to what Satan wants to use him
It
for.
says Satan enters into him with that.
So Satan enters into him. But this is the second time we read that Satan enters into him. So Satan enters into him when he goes to the chief priest to make the deal. And now we read that Satan enters into him once he's been pointed out by Jesus. And so he's been called out. To what he believes he's going to be doing, we can only speculate that perhaps he's trying to force Jesus' hand, knowing that he has the power to do whatever he wants to do, and hopefully this will speed up the process. But once he betrays Jesus with that kiss and sees that he's arrested and Jesus isn't doing anything to resist and that he's going to the cross, it's at that point that he realizes he's betrayed innocent blood. So, but he's not repentant. He's remorseful, but not repentant. Jesus said it would have been better for that man had he not been born. So Jesus was not mistaken, so that we can say, well, Judas, he was let off, and he may have made things right before he hung himself. Jesus said it would have been better had he not been born. The son of perdition, and the only other person that has that distinction is the man of sin, the man of perdition, who is referred to by the generic title as Antichrist, the Antichrist, the world leader during the tribulation. So with that, it leaves us with one other aspect for the meal before the fourth cup is shared. But for us to deal with that is going to take us longer than we have to treat it the way we need to deal with it for tonight. And so our time is up, and we will finish up that aspect of the Passover meal and the instruction that Jesus will be giving during that period of time, now that Judas is gone. And we're going to be looking at John 14, 15, 16, 17. So there's a lot going on in those aspects. So we're going to hit the high points of that. Pardon me?
That all takes place before the last cup.
Not all of it takes place before the last cup. 13, the remainder of 13 and 14 take place before the last cup. And then 15 and 16 are most likely when they are on their way from that upper room to Gethsemane. So it's going to help us to appreciate the context and the flow of what is taking place when and where and why it's happening and why Jesus is giving the instruction he is. So that is the Lord's Supper. There's one more cup, the fourth, that is not referred to here, but would have been partaken by them, and we'll see what that represents and how it plays in with something that Matthew says. After they had done a certain thing, then they went out from the meal.